A few words about Birgitta for those who don't know her. She's talking tonight on the Roman roads on the Gask. She studied in Germany and Durham under Brian Dobson and David Breeze, of course. She's worked in Ireland, Manchester, Canada, the USA, back to Manchester now, and has been working on the Roman Gask with David Woolliscroft for over 20 years, apparently. Although exactly how far over 20 years, she doesn't want us to know. Now, she did also mention that next year, her field work will be at Strathcathro. I always misspell that and mispronounce it, but a very important camp in Scotland, which gives its name to a particular gateway. We thought we'd found one of those not so long ago, but it turned out not to be. But hey ho, would have been the first in England. Right. With no further ado, then, I will pass over to Birgitta.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your kind invitation. This is the first time I've ever been the Christmas attraction at a society. I hope that it will be enjoyable. So thank you very much for coming tonight. So when I got the invitation, I asked whether there were special interests, especially if you're talking to somebody like the Roman Roads Research Association. There's always an opportunity as well as a joy of being invited. And so when they very kindly said I should bring in some of the stuff that may interest some of the members and members might be possibly able to help with, I was thinking long and hard. So what I'm going to present today is sort of our thinking up to date. We're hoping that by next autumn we're going to have the article ready for submission on what we think the Roman road on the Gask is, when it is, how it was built. All that will, of course, require some of the field work to happen. And I would be very grateful for Omicron if it didn't scupper that in the same way as it was that its predecessor scuppered the last 2 years. But so this is the dress rehearsal, if you want to. So I would be very grateful for any suggestions where we should look for further parallels, or where you think that we should focus during our field season. So for those of you who've never been, this is Scotland, well north of the Antonine Wall, which is actually down there is Camelon, and Glasgow is just at the bottom left-hand corner down there. So you can see we're very much further north. And in fact, if you get to Strathcathro, that is 15 minutes before you pull into Aberdeen station. So you really are covering quite a long stretch of Scotland from the east coast to the Forth of Clyde, and basically that the length is somewhere around 100 miles, 160 kilometers. So perhaps not a surprise that we've not run out of things to do in 20 years. And it's very good to see that there's now some more researchers working in the area, and I look forward to hearing about their results as well later on in the year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you bit by bit through the road. So first of all, we're going to start with something pretty basic. What sort of road are we actually talking about? Now, if you have a familiarity with the Gask and you look at the normal plans of Roman Scotland, you get told that the Romans moved into Scotland in the 1st century AD, at the end of the 1st century AD. And there is some debate whether that was closer to 69 which is what the Carlisle dates suggest, or closer to 79, which is what the Elgenhof dates suggest. And it's quite possible that they moved at different speeds on different sides of the country. We certainly have got no definitive evidence to switch between the two dates, except that we have a lot of material that is happening, that a lot of evidence for redesigning, for replacements. So both David and I are a little bit unhappy with the idea that we may only have 18 months. Even the Romans weren't that keen at redecorating all the time. And if you're already having to build somewhere short of 20 forts, plus all the smaller installations, then 18 months is a problem. It's even more of a problem if you're building a road, because very luckily have got comparative evidence for what was possible to build during the 18th century when the military roads were built, who were actually built to a very similar specifications to the Roman road that we see between Stregeith and Ardagh. And they could, in a good year, achieve somewhere around 10 kilometers. So about 8 miles. On a very good year, they managed 10 miles. If that's the case, we have, as I said, about 180 kilometers, 100 miles. That would have taken them 10 years. They definitely didn't manage to do that. So where we actually find so far evidence of a continuous metalled road in along the Gask, it's in the central sector from down at the bottom here at a place called Glenbank, passing through Ardagh, the fortlet at Kames Castle, to the second fort at Stregeith, then past the fortlet of Midgate, on towards the fort at Bertha. As you have seen by the map that I showed you first, there's a lot more than this, and there are lots of smaller installations as well. But in this central sector, ever since the 18th century, people have been talking about the Roman road. In fact, that stretch here from Park Nude to Gask House is or was known until the 1950s just as the Roman road. And yeah, you can't avoid dating it to the Roman period if you're in the early 20th century with Christensen, who are the first ones who are excavating here, and there's Roman sites both sides of it. There is a road linking these sites. It must be a Roman road. And because everybody knew at that time that Agricola said he was first in Scotland, and because you had Flavian material from Ardagh, from Stregeith, and from Bertha at the time, what easier to say it is a Flavian road. It has to be said, unlike in the Netherlands, where we have beautiful timber dates to date the roads that flanks the Rhine, and we have no such intrinsic dating actually coming from the road itself. So we are dating by association and we are dating by convention. There. So what do we actually have on the ground? We have in the central sector, so this is the area that used to be called the Roman road, we have a very straight, a very nicely laid out road that is pretty much a ridgeway, facing into a fairly deep valley on one side to the Erin and onto a much flatter area on the north side, facing the highlands, but they actually are at that point somewhere close to 5 kilometers away. So you actually have quite a lot of space in the middle there. The road is over short stretches still in use as a modern road. Over slightly longer stretches, it's a field path or an agricultural route, much traveled by dog walkers and tourists all over the area. It's a lovely walk in the summer. Highly recommend it if you ever get the chance. And it takes you literally past the Roman sites. This is the cluster at Ardoch. Most of you will be familiar with that famous fort corner, but what very few people realize is the Roman road actually takes you past most of the camps as well. So you see it's actually nowhere near the modern A22. It is running quite some distance on the far side. But the camps are all arranged in such a way that they can benefit from this route. And that is something very typical. We have clusters of camps that are literally following the road or the suggested route of the road. And again, we may be sort of walking in circles occasionally because the road is next to the camps at Strageath and next to the camps at Bertha and next to the camps at Ardoch. We assume that the next time we see a cluster of camps, there must have been at some point a Roman road there. Unfortunately, we have problems actually identifying that. Right, so let's go and have a look at some of the details that you actually have from that road. So there's the system again, and this is Strageath. And you can show we've sectioned the road in Strageath. We made a rather nice open plan excavations here over the extension of that parchmark, which turned out to be a fully metalled Roman road. We also put a section over the parchmark over here, equally well developed metalled road. So there's absolutely no doubt that Strageath had a Roman road system, not just inside the defences, but also outside the defences. And this parchmark that follows the hedge here can actually be followed for quite a long way. So that is actually the Roman road we were talking about. And the parchmark is caused by considerable metalling. We also have on the other side a very different road. This is the road cutting at Inner Pefre, and for those of you unfamiliar with this, this is the urn up here. So we're now leaving the fort through the other side, and you can see there's another set of parchmarks coming up here. And where that parchmark reaches the water, there's a ford that runs diagonally across the urn and ends up in the middle of this woodland here. If you cross the river, and you can do that during the summer, but make sure on the other side there's somebody who brings another pair of trousers, because most people slip halfway through, including me. But it is a perfectly viable fort. And on the other side, you come into this section, which is a very deep cutting through the escarpment that is on the opposite side of Strageath. So this is the high edge, and the road has to actually climb by about 7 meters to get onto the plateau on the opposite side. So there is your plan. That is the road, the parchmark I pointed out. There's the ford through the River Erne, and there is this really rather long S-shaped cutting, making sure that you actually get in a nice and even gradient from the river level all the way up to the plateau. My husband and a lot of volunteers, local volunteers, sectioned this, and this is what was found at the bottom, complete with a large amount of comments on how wonderful it is to make sections into deep sand. And it actually turned out this cutting isn't just somebody randomly cutting into a sand dune. That would not have been a clever move. But what the Romans did is they put this cutting in and they lined the cutting throughout with a very thick layer of clay to basically ensure that the erosion couldn't take the sand out. So this clay is still there. It's still about 10 centimeters thick. So that is what's stabilizing the side of the cuttings. How does that rank in Roman engineering techniques? It's not something that you would give to a beginner. It isn't quite as sophisticated as trying to design a route across the Alps, but it would have taken a considerable time putting this in, especially as at the bottom of it, they then also put more gravel down and cobbles down to actually get a proper body for the roads. You can see from the excavation that the road is extremely well rutted. It would be nice to think that was all the Romans. Unfortunately, not so much. We actually know that this road stayed in use until the beginning of the 19th century. We have excellent historical records in Perthshire called the Road Commissioners' Reports and the minutes of the road commissioners, which were meeting from the end of the 17th century about 5 times a year to debate which roads, which bridges, which traffic infrastructure would be built throughout the county of Perth, how much money they would put towards it, who would pay for it, whether this would be the local landowners or whether this would be statute labor, i.e. everybody would be called out to help. And we know from that period that basically when they built the road that to the bridge to Crieff, they basically that was financed as being a toll road. Result was that, of course, the local residents, how would you expect otherwise, decided, but we know where the ford is. Why should we pay 6pence to cross to Crieff and 6pence back for each horse if we can actually just go through the ford in the Erne, come up at Intrenchuthill and then take the long route around to Crieff? Result is that in the early 19th century, there are a number of decisions being taken to basically shut up the ford, to install large hedges at the bottom and at the top of the cutting, and basically make it impossible to continue using the ford, which probably is what has preserved this so well, because in an age where otherwise you would have seen widening for putting concrete in, for heightening it to put a higher bridge on in the 20th century, this was basically becoming a little forgotten dell next to Innerpeffray Library, and thus we still have this view. But is it a Roman road? It was certainly built by the Romans, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of the smaller gravel in here and a lot of the wheel ruts that we're seeing were probably created much later. So the Romans built a road that stayed in use for 1600 years. How long does this road stretch? I showed you the metalled road that is going out of Stregeeth, and I showed you that it actually continues for quite a distance. Unfortunately, this is Cargill, much further north, the next fort north after Bertha. And you can see there too, we have parch marks coming out of the gate, which suggests that there is some sort of metalling there. Unfortunately, the metalling doesn't stretch very far. About 15 years ago, we did a huge survey covering this field, but also the neighboring field. And the geophysics didn't produce any evidence for metalling that continued on the line of the stump road that is coming out. And that is something that we see in the northern forts again and again. We have Roman forts which have metalled roads inside the forts, sometimes inside the annexes, and they stretch across the ditch system and then another 10 meters or so beyond the ditch system, and they stop. Lovingly called stump roads by Gordon Maxwell about 40 years ago. It suggests that basically people were building the forts, people were expecting the road to eventually connect, but similar as in Hadrian's Wall, where you see the forts having wing walls and expecting Hadrian's Wall to link up to them, the same thing seemed to have been happening here with the roads, but the road never links up. Neither at Cardine, neither at Bertha, not at Inverquarity, nor at Stracathro. None of these stump roads ever gets connected to a metalled road. In fact, if you're at the southern end of the system, this is the Roman fort of Malling at the Lake of Menteith, the only fort that actually continues for about 4 meters under the water level, literally here. That is all still fort area. And you can see some of the internal structures. There is a building there. You can see that you have the ditch system. You can see that you have disposal pits, which seem to be aligning alongside the road, as they so often do with timber forts in the final phase. But if you look to the gate here, you see that there's no stump road coming out of it. There is no metalling at all in these forts. So they didn't even get as far as the stump roads here. So we have a central part which is fully metalled and fully connected. We have a northern part which was expecting the roads to be metalled. We have southern forts which don't even have the expectation of having a metalled road connecting to it. So, there it is again. There is the connected road. There is Cargill, Intrenchuthill, Cardine, Inverquarity, and Stracathro lie beyond. Dalgenrose may have stump roads, but Bochastle, Drumcastle, and the Lake of Menteith don't have any stump roads. So, what's going on? We also have the situation here at Shield Hill North, which has been the result of many interesting Sunday breakfasts between me and David Woollerscroft. And for those not in the know, at some point during the period of this project, I married him. So Sunday morning academic disputes turn into happy marital moments at times. So one of the points that we continue to debate is this site here. It's Shield Hill North. It's just before Kames Castle, north of Ardagh. And as you can see, we have a lot of evidence, aerial evidence for a metalled Roman road. It also showed in the geophysical survey that we did. We also have lots of quarry pits alongside this road. In fact, we have quarry pits on both of these branches. And yeah, this is where we start discussing, because we dug literally here on the junction about 8 years ago, and we still haven't decided what we exactly have found. And this northern part goes straight up the hill where the tower sits on the highest point, and then dips down again towards the burn here on the site, only to come very steeply up the other side again. The southern branch stays away from the top of the hill and goes down in a shallow gradient towards the burn, and then on the other side comes up in a cutting. Now, my husband's argument is they're both Roman, and you have the first road, which turned out to be a bit too steep for works, so they basically just kept that as a supply route to the tower. And later on, the Romans decided to improve on the design, and having already built a cutting at Inner Pefri, there's the cutting on the far side. My argument is, yep, the northern one is definitely the Roman road. Based on my experience of Roman roads, for example, in the Black Forest, which basically don't take prisoners. If you can't do steep, then don't do those Roman roads. And this would be actually still quite mellow by comparison. But having been through the road commissioner's reports, there are references that during the 18th century, and again at the beginning of the 19th century, people were complaining that this road, which was still in use at the time, was too steep for wheel traffic. And especially just before 1745, George Murray, later on general to Bonnie Prince Charlie, was actually pushing the point that this road should be made usable for cannon. And there should be a wider bridge at Ardoch. And he also said you should take the gradients out of it. So my argument is they got to that steep part and they decided to create a new track that basically came at a lower gradient down into the burn and back out again, so that it could take cannon and gun carriages on that road. Can I prove it? No. Unfortunately, the records do not specify exactly where they put the cuttings. We do know they did build some of the cuttings. We do know they replaced the bridge at Ardoch, so the work was conducted, but I can't say whether that is a Roman or a 18th century cutting. So are we having to debate on whether this is a Roman or an 18th century road, or is it just both, as in the road stayed in use throughout and in the 18th century saw a lot of maintenance? Actually, the situation gets even worse. We're back at Inner Pefri. There's the road cutting coming up, but we're now going to stay here on the plateau. And in fact, within the 2 kilometers of the road cutting, there are now 3 sections through the Roman road, including one in Parknuke Wood here on the far side, which proved that the Roman road, the proper metalled road, was actually sitting on an underpinning of turf to actually build it up properly with a proper camber in that part of the area. So this is not just a sort of quick road construction. This is actually textbook how to build a really good Roman road. Halfway between those 2 points is this section here, where the line of the road cuts across a 63-acre camp. 63-acre camps is a sequence of camps that are usually attributed to the 2nd century AD, and the result is that you have, at this point, it seems as if the 63-acre camp is cutting across the road, or at least when we started sectioning that road, that's what we expected. We expected that the 2nd century camp would completely destroy the Roman road. That was not the case. What we actually found was a 2nd century camp ditch, and on top of it, in the backfilled camp ditch, right on the top, is the metalling of the Roman road. It is not the 18th century road, because the 18th century road runs on a different alignment over here. And the medieval road to this area runs on a different alignment again, which was down here along the river. So just for once, we can rule out that this is a later reuse. But that leaves us with the problem that the metalling may actually not be Flavian. And that what may have happened is that you basically laid out a track in the Flavian period, and everybody knew where the road was going to go. And alongside, the Roman installations went in, awaiting the road to be built. With the withdrawal from Scotland, that didn't happen. So you then have 2nd century activity, and it doesn't have to be Antonine. We know that Hadrian was operating in Britain, so this may be early 2nd century. We can't date the camp. We haven't got any dating at all to actually get a spot date from this point. But we do know that the metalling is on top of that on the Roman arrangement. We know at Parknewk Wood you have beautiful metalling, but you only have one face of metalling. So what could it be? Well, we do know that in the Antonine phase, so in the middle of the 2nd century, we are back in Scotland, and we know that the forts of Ardoch, Tregeath and Bertha and Cargill and Dalgenross are being brought back into use. We have Antonine pottery from all sides. So there was a need to bring the road back as well. But the second time round, there are at least 10 years in Scotland. They really have got time to not just build the forts, but actually build the structures as well, the linking structures as well. And we know from the Antonine Wall that the Antonine roads really are quite something. I had the misfortune of having to section them. That was 3 months with repetitive stress injury that will stay with me for in my memory quite fondly. So it wouldn't be unheard of to actually say that they brought back the road and with it the metalling for the roads that they were actually, for the area that they were actually occupying. So not the fort at Malling, not the fort at Drumcastle or Callender, Beaucastle, which doesn't seem to have had an Antonine face, but only the ones that are actually in occupation during the Antonine phase. And that would explain why you wouldn't have so many stump roads, or in the southern forts, why there are stump roads in Cargill, though it wouldn't explain the stump roads at Cardine. So again, expectation of a metalled road for which people may have had to wait 60 years. Right, so chapter 2, where does it all end? Where's the southern end of this road? We definitely know there's a Roman road at Green Loaning. Again, that is the Roman watchtower. It was excavated. We found the edges of the Roman road during the excavation, so we know that the road's still there. When you go south of it, the next Roman installation is the fortlet at Glenbank, which is sitting here in the in the picture on the right. And the Roman road literally is still in use as a field track down here past the now abandoned farm, and then continues as a field track and as a hedge all the way over what is known as Kinbuckmuir, which is this area here, all the way past the whole of Kinbuckmuir, and you get to eventually to Lower Withstone. And we did do a section here, which we're not 100% sure if it's there. And we definitely know that when we did the section at Glassingall here at the south, there wasn't any road there. So it may be possible that the railway station, which originally existed down here at Kinbuck, destroyed the road because they were collecting the water from Kinbuckmuir to basically fill up the steam engines before they continued on to up the hill towards Perth. But there is nothing surviving in any evidence, and there's also, despite us flying for about 15 years over the site again and again, nobody has actually managed to photograph any of the road stretching beyond Glassingall. So where does it go? We do have a road heading out of Camelon towards Stirling. We haven't got a fort at Stirling, and we haven't got the road crossing the river at Stirling. It stops just before it hits the park in Stirling itself. So we have the road coming out of Gardoch, and there may have been in the 2nd century a metalled road. That's a very well metalled road coming out of Camelon. So if this is a 2nd century metalled road, then that is likely to be a 2nd century metalled road. But what other options do we have? Well, we do know that there's a Roman fort at Doon. And from Doon, you can cross the Forth and the Forth Mosses on something called the Forts of Frew, which was the main crossing point before Stirling Bridge was built. And crossing there has the advantage that you can then move south on both directions in equal distance. So to Drumcastle and on to the Clyde at Dumbarton and at Borochan, and on the other side just as easily back to Camelon. So it would have been a good halfway house. If you actually look at what the archaeology is like, and this is the First Ordnance Survey, the modern road goes straight down a very sharp embankment through Keir Park and then past Stirling Castle. That was one of the engineering feats of the 19th century, coming up that hill. The medieval roads come out of Dunblane and they go out beyond Kippen, and they come in a turn and go to the Bridge of Allen on one side, or they go out the other side to Doon. And the yellow smiley is the Iron Age site at East Caldoch that we excavated, which has finds from the Roman finds from the 1st to the 4th century, and is sitting at the easternmost end of the Forts of Frew. So it is actually just possible, or just as possible, to get as quickly to Doon as it is to get to Stirling. Again, have we got any evidence? Unfortunately not. There is a lot of linear features in this particular area. If you go onto Google Maps and look at that, there are so many linear features. And we do know there are abandoned 18th century and pre-18th century roads in this area. For example, the one that is here broken up already. But we haven't got the link up with our site here at Kinbuckmuir, where we have the last time the road properly proven. So there is our big question mark, Stirling or Doon, which one is it to be? Right, chapter 3. How do we get to the northern forts? As you can see, we have lots and lots of forts to the north of Bertha, Cargill, Cardine, Invercarity, Stracathro, but more importantly, Intrenchuthill. Just to show you what the big problem is, Intrenchuthill is here on this island, basically. Cargill Fort is here on the far side. In the middle, you have a very much meandering Tay. And if you think, hang on, these are old routes, yes, that meander was cut off in the 18th century. This meander was formed in the 19th century. The meander here on the side predates 1720. And we know that at some point after the Romans were there, the Tay actually flowed on the north side of the river because it has actually destroyed and eroded the northern defenses of Intrenchuthill Fortress. We also have the problem that before the Reformation, the parish boundary between Dunblane between Dunkeld and its neighboring parishes is actually on the north side of Intrenchuthill. It's only after 1620 that the Tay becomes the parish boundary, which suggests that the Tay may have done something rather interesting somewhere around that point in time. We also have the problem that there is the Isla on that side, which is to the north, which is navigable in the 18th century before the land was drained. And this is the next problem. The land is drained. Today, this is the most fertile part in Perthshire. But even as far back as the 1920s, there are vast stretches of swamp here. In fact, this entire area here in the middle is one big bog, which was always avoided. So going the direct route is not the best move in this part of the world. We also know that the current way in which the roads run in this area have nothing to do with the pre-18th century roads. The 18th century, the pre-18th century roads run, for example, right here through Strelitz Wood in the middle, and from there on to the Abbey at Cooper Angus. That's the medieval road. This road here past Strelitz and Myerside was built in the 19th century. This one was built as a toll road in the 18th century. This one was built in the 18th century, and this one was built in the 1770s. So none of these roads has claimed to be Roman. We also can't we do need a road north because you can't use river transport. This is the Tay at a place called Campsie Lynn. And as you can see on this one, this was in a beautiful, very dry summer, and it made it just look like a bit of a problem because you had to be very careful with your canoe to get through here. But even a beginner like me could easily do that. This was 5 years ago in the summer, and at which point the person who is going through this called it, "Oh, this is the happy 5." This makes a very, very nasty vortex. Would have stopped any water traffic coming down unless the water was extremely low. So if you want to keep your fort supplied, you need to have road transport. But how? Especially as there's the Campsie Lynn. By the time you actually account for the 18th century weirs that are around Stanley, you have more of these vortexes forming and of these waterfalls forming in the Tay. So there's a really rather long stretch that you can't use the river for. Right. Hang on, I forgot something. Here at this point, you see that nice blue line that I so happily drew on my working map. That is a stretch of road that was seen at the beginning of the 18th century and regularly used by people trying to get stuff from Cambus Michael here on the side to St. Martin's, which is another 2 kilometers away, and is described as a metalled road. What is important is this was described by the people who were doing the surveying to put all the 18th century roads in. So this is not a new road. This is something that is just sitting in the middle there, and it isn't dated, but it makes beautiful potch marks. We also, as I said, have to adjust for all the swamp in that area. And while I already said that you have a large area of swamp to the south of the Tay, opposite Intrenchuthill, which would have made it very, very hard to actually cross that at all. The medieval road actually goes on the high ground here on the far side and comes out at Dunkeld, rather than trying to cross in any shape or form in this triangle. So not likely that you would see a lot of Roman road building here. The other side is also quite boggy. You can see our little notices wherever we have encountered bog material or names called mire site or bogland or literary references to it. And so the Romans would have had to also try and stay on the high ground to stay out of this wet ground. And the site that we're about to submit to PSAS, Woodhead, was discovered from the air by making a beautiful, well, making lots and lots of round features, but one of them actually looked exactly like one of the watchtowers on the south. When we excavated, it was like one of the watchtowers on the south side. But what was interesting is we also had the opportunity to do geophysics, and we actually found this hedgerow is sitting again on a metalled road, which raises eyebrows because this is the side, this is what you see when you're on top of Woodhead. That's the hedgerow you saw from the on the plan earlier, and you can see what an amazing view it has. And that is the swampland beyond it. But it also is the link to Intrenchuthill, and it's the link to Cargill. It's the high point before you have to come down into the valley. Now, my husband spent a considerable amount of time combining my literary evidence with lots and lots of geophysical data, lots and lots of aerial data, and basically came up with a series of sites of potential round features, which may be watchtowers, but there is the site at Byres with the road. And basically, as you can see, all these sites where he has got straight road alignments seem to be sort of lining up. And these road alignments are things like this. This is opposite Bertha, and you can see a linear feature coming straight through the rapeseed at this point. And this is the upper end when it comes down from Woodhead to Cargill, and you can see again on Gallows Hill this really nice long road lining up with this later stretch of road heading towards the ford over the Isla. So when you all tie this together, it looks rather promising, as if the Roman road might actually have originally gone from Bertha on the opposite side where I showed you the photograph to that long stretch that I just showed you in the last photograph. And yeah, it would be fun, except that there seems to be two roadways here at Woodhead, which we can't quite explain. So may this be the Roman road that actually did the supply work for Intrenchuthill? It's tempting. As I said, we did have a chance of seeing some of the feature, and this part is metalled. But does that mean that they extended the metalling to Cargill because Cargill was in use? It's tempting, but we're still very cagey. It would be good if we could go and excavate some more on this side, but the entire estate that this stretches through, especially here in the central part, which is vital, has been up for sale just before COVID struck. And we're hoping that everything will be settling down and that the new owners would be willing to let us do some road sections. But a note of caution. This is the same gallows road I showed you earlier with a beautiful straight line that was coming down from the hill and joining up with the existing road. If you look at it as road researchers, you will recognize this. This is a road fan. This is somebody coming down a hill and making sure that they're not in the wheel ruts of everybody else. So this is a lot of roads. This stayed in use until a very long time, and basically until the toll road to Cargill opened up again in the 19th century. And which of these is the Roman one, and how much of this has the post-Roman period actually transformed the Roman road? We do know there's a bit of metaling up here under the bushes, which was really helpful, and there's a bit of metaling in the edge here on the woodland and under this particular pylon as well. That's as far as we've managed to get with our survey data so far. So it's a metalled road. It's a road that predates the 18th century. It has some medieval gallows on it. It has also got a Bronze Age standing stones alongside it. So it's definitely a very long-standing routeway. But did the Romans use it as a routeway, or did the Romans actually add some engineering to it? Right. Query. Do you want another chapter, or shall I stop? Mike?
By all means, keep going.
Okay. Because chapter 4 is the Roman roads around Intrenchuthill. If we're agreeing that there has to be a road to Cargill, and we're saying, but the metaling may not have happened in the Flavian period, then Intrenchuthill is going to be one of those points where you're going to go, but we have a Roman road on Intrenchuthill. Or do we? Basically, we have, once again, there is that picture again with Intrenchuthill. The Roman fortress is basically sitting here in that central part. And the main access point now onto this island is basically following the old Via Principalis, and then past the edge here on that headland used to be a medieval castle, then an 18th century house. And it comes down, goes through the floodplain of the Tay until it reaches high ground again on the far side. There is also an earlier route which seems to leave from this point up here, which has produced some beautiful parch marks in the field just to the north of the old castle. There are other ways onto the fortress, but those have always been the most important ones, at least in the last 400 years. The question is, of course, when did the Tay jump? Is the Tay and the Roman period on the north side or on the south side? Because if this is actually south of the river, then you would have to look for ferry points. But so far we have no answer to this, except to know that an initial survey has basically established that there are about 30 different riverbeds in the floodplain. And frankly, we haven't got the 60,000 pounds that we need for massive coring to actually date all the different riverbeds and do those wonderful reconstructions that have been made in the last 15 years in the Netherlands of the various courses of the Rhine bed and in the Delta. It would be wonderful to have the same thing for the Tay. It would answer so many questions. But unless I win that lottery, I doubt we will ever have the money to actually do this. But there's another problem. So there's the fortress, and there at the front here is that road. Interestingly, that road during our survey had structures coming off it in an area where Roman material occurred, but nothing else, no later material. So, and where there's no historical record of any material that is actually that could be dated to the medieval or early modern period. So it is possible this is actually the vicus outside Intrenchuthill, but, or rather Canabe, given that it's that it is a fortress. But again, needs more work on that one. Right, just on the far side of the floodplain is this aerial photograph, which was first photographed by J.K. St. Joseph and has since been photographed several times by the Royal Commission, and David has got several of those as well. And as you can see, there are several alignments of quarry pits on this. There seems to be also some sort of alignment running through this area. And when you actually get onto this area, this is otherwise a gravel plateau, but this area in the middle is extremely stony. So Richmond originally published this as a Roman road from the Intrenchuthill fortress to the quarries at Intrenchuthill, above Intrenchuthill at the Hill of Gordy. Made perfect sense to everybody who always came by car and took a good look at the hill and went, nah, I'm not walking up on that. The problem is, when you actually do walk up the hill, it begins to look very, very different. This is us halfway up the Hill of Gordy. And there's the fortress in the background. There's the mark that is coming out of the north side. There, and the red marks are marking where the quarry pits are. And the interesting bit was when we were up there, as you see, it was in the middle of harvest season. We spent an entire afternoon finding really heavy lorries going up and down onto this field and always following the line of the quarry pits. In the end, we actually stopped them and went, just out of interest, why don't you go down the back? And they went, the gradient is better here. This is a much better gradient, and the underpinning is extremely solid. So on the other road, the field track is apparently a little bit ropey. This one is the best road in the area. And we went, okay, well, Roman engineering, what can you say? What's the problem? The problem is, if you follow that road to its logical end, you fetch up here. This is the 18th century mill. This is the largest mill, corn mill, in the entire area. It was milling for about 50 farms, and that road that you see was its old supply road, and that's where they brought their heavy grain wagons in and out of the mill. So again, are we talking about one road? Are we talking about a reused road? How old is this mill? I mean, it's an 18th century mill. What's the problem? The problem is that this is actually a lot older. This is the oldest map of the area. Timothy Pond dates to about the reign of Elizabeth I, stroke James VI. Insert your loyalties as needed. William the Taciturn for our guests from the Netherlands. And there is that fort, there's that castle I talked about on Intrenchuthill. But if you actually look up, you can actually identify where these different areas are. And you see that little round circle. That little round circle is the symbol for a medieval mill on Timothy Pond's map. And you can actually see very helpfully mill written right next to it. And if you go up, that's the mill burn that that the mill is taking the water from. But the mill originally is here. The 18th century mill is here at the bottom. And you can see actually the road goes, there was a medieval mill even higher up in this area. So this is a long-established mill stream. There's a castle on one end, there is a medieval mill on the other, there's a road linking it. So, are we having a Roman road or having a medieval road? There's another problem. Those are the roofs of that mill that I showed you earlier, and that is the quarry road that you need to actually get to the quarries on Gordy Hill. As you can see, there is a little bit of a height difference. And the only way you're going to get from that lower road to the higher road beyond the mill is a pretty good 2.5 kilometers of actually walking out the incline so that you can actually come around. So this is not an easy route to get to the quarries. This is one of those quarries. In the current state, this is the one that Richmond identified as a Roman quarry. There is my husband trying to fight his way into the quarry site and failing. It wasn't the barbed wire that was the problem. It was the 5 large trees that are all falling over each other. You literally can't get to the cliff face anymore. So there was no way we could actually check if the Roman quarry marks are still there. But there are plenty of other quarries just along the road. This is one of them. This one I actually have the estate records for that say when this was quarried or when this quarry face was left, which was the 1740s. And there are also quarries at much lower ground behind it. This is Kirkton of Lethendy. This is the medieval parish church, the one that predates the destruction of the castle. This one has been a church since at least 1400, 1380. It even has its own tower attached to the about 800 meter further up the road. And what is very striking is, it is about, I'm standing in the floodplain here at Intrenchuthill. That is where the church is, and that here, and this woodland behind it is a pre-18th century quarry. It was not used in the 18th century. It had been worked out. The stone that was coming up there was not workable. But it's a very large quarry. So if you're trying to get quarry material for the south face of Intrenchuthill Fortress or for the bath block at Intrenchuthill onto Intrenchuthill, would you go up a 6 kilometer road to get to the top of the hill of Gordy? Or would you go on a 2 kilometer track over flat ground and extract the stone pretty much on level ground if all you have is horsepower and yourself? I suppose the answer to this one depends very much on your personal level of masochism. I'm lazy. I would go for the lower quarry. But again, I haven't been able to prove it. And geologically, these quarries are all the same. So doing a sandstone analysis actually turns out to be all the same sandstone bedding. So let's put it all together. Do we still have a Roman road? Good question. This is the situation. There is Intrenchuthill Fortress. There is Delvin House or Delvin Castle. There is that road that I talked about that is making the parch marks in the floodplain. There is that road with the pits that started all this, that Richmond called the Roman road. There's the medieval mill at 40. There is Lethendy Church. And you can see there is the road, the 2 kilometer road over flat ground that allows you to get up onto Intrenchuthill. It's basically, if you've ever been to Intrenchuthill, it's the back entrance. It's the one where you go past the farmhouse. So we know that all these triangles are improved farmhouses that in the 18th century were built with material from these quarries here on the top. Never from the quarry here at the bottom, always from the top quarries. We know that Gurdy House, that Ruffle, now Glendelvin, and Snago are medieval. We know that the quarries are medieval. We know that Lethendy Tower is medieval and that Lethendy Church is medieval. You've seen the upper road here and how flat it is. It literally tries to stay on a very level ground and very gently comes down towards Lethendy Church before gently rising again onto the tower. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason why this road is so well engineered. This is the road that Dunkeld built to be able to use these quarries to build Dunkeld Cathedral. We actually have in these two quarries the quarry marks for Dunkeld Cathedral in it. So, and if you're on the higher level, if you're at this point, you actually don't need to climb, because where this road sinks, the upper road stays straight and incidentally fetches up on the steep stalls. So you have a high level road that links all the medieval sites except Intrenchuthill, and you have a low level road that links the 18th century mill, possibly the medieval mill, to Delvin House, and equally comes up at a very gentle gradient. The one thing that road doesn't go to is steep stalls. And in fact, again, if you want to go to steep stalls, you would be much easier coming up Lethendy Church, following that road up and coming that way. It's not half as steep and not half as long. So why is this a medieval road? Or why is this not a medieval road? And why are we so sure that just because it's got marks on the bottom, are gravel pit marks, that it is Roman? There's no Roman material associated with any of this. Right. Okay. That was 4 chapters on us trying to find Roman roads and finding definitely medieval and modern roads, but also finding that when we have Roman roads, we have quite sophisticated engineering happening with the cuttings. But we also have got forts that are being used. We have the Romans sometimes needlessly going up a hill when they don't have to, because it's nice and straight when you do it. And if my husband is right, learning from their mistake and going, no, we're doing it a slightly different way afterwards. As I said, we're hoping by the end of the summer to have this ready for publication. I'm deeply aware that we started off with lots and lots of wonderful Roman roads, and now I've got lots and lots of Roman question mark roads. So as the Roman Roads Research Association, help! And thank you for your attention. Cheers.
Thank you, Birgitta. Help, indeed. We'll have to talk in the future about that. I'm sure we can find somewhere that we can help, although it might have to be reciprocal.
Okay.
A paper about this, not only in Scotland, but in our journal itinerary, would be much appreciated. And I won't beg, though. Anyway, moving on. No, thank you very much for a fascinating talk, which raised a lot of issues, some of which I'll touch on if we don't get them in questions. Now, to date, we don't have a huge number as yet, but they tend to come in as people think about them later. So I will start with one from Rob Entwistle, who says, Birgitta mentioned stump roads. Would this have been normal practice for forts built before the road system was completed? I'm assuming Rob is talking on general terms, not specifically the gas ridge.
I've seen stump roads in Germany on forts on the Limes. I have seen in Roxeter roads being laid out that then weren't connected in that way to the later road network, which suggests that it starts off as stump roads as well. But I was told by Eric Grafstahl 12 years ago that the fort he was digging at the time, that the dates that were coming with the earliest roads, the timber roads leading out of that fort near Utrecht, were earlier than the connecting road. I don't know if that date still holds now that all the dates are in, but if that's the case, you would have a wooden stump road.
Right. That would certainly be interesting. I'm certainly aware of one or two forts in northern England that have stump roads. I'm pretty sure, I'll get corrected if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure Binchester has one heading eastwards where there's no known Roman road. And off the top of my head, I'm desperately trying to think of others. I know there are others. It seems to have been fairly common practice, but not universal.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, whether they were intended to link to later roads or they were just to ease movement out from that particular gateway, I suppose it could be both. Right, next one from Paul Kobe. Here's a question. What was the Gask Ridge Road for? Was it to keep the Venicones under control, or was it to keep the Caledones out? Or was it neither of those? He doesn't say that. I'm adding that.
I think as many people who've worked on the Gask, as many opinions what that road was for. There is no doubt that it is also that one of its important functions is to supply everybody on the road, because you have Bertha, you have the harbor at Bertha, you have the harbor at Doon, and people want to eat. The stuff has to arrive somehow. And I don't think people would have been happy if somebody tried to bring the eggs up through the Campsie Lynn. I think that would have been one omelette too many. And so they're definitely they have a supply function. Because they have the towers alongside it, they also have an observation function. Whether they're looking south or whether they're looking north, or whether the soldiers were told to use their initiative and do a 360 degree, is up for grabs. There are currently two people who are arguing that it's a 360 degree observation zone. I have absolutely no problem with that. The one thing that it isn't is it isn't a boundary. It is basically it isn't like Hadrian's Wall, because there is no, the barrier is the Highland boundary fault. The barrier is not on the road. They haven't got as far as putting the wall up yet. Or you could argue they found a much bigger wall that they couldn't rival, and therefore they just kept the Highland boundary fault as their main obstacle. Is it for controlling the Caledoni? I think that could have been difficult. Intrenchuthill is a much better way of using of controlling the Caledoni than the road itself. The road has just the towers alongside it and 500 men in each of the forts. That should be easily surmountable if you are a dedicated main chieftain. If you are a bunch of cattle thieves, that's a different matter entirely. And one of the fun parts of the forts in that area is how they all block outcomes from various valleys that interlink behind the first screen of hills. So they're not so much blocking entrance from the highlands as stopping people sneaking out into the highlands, coming out on at Bertha, stealing the cattle, bringing it back into the highlands so that nobody knows, and when they eventually will come out again at Dalgenross or at Stregeith. So they stop that. They're good at this way in which the forts and the observation towers are working. They would be good at controlling traffic in the form of controlling illicit traffic, not in going, sorry, you were driving too fast.
A very, very complete answer. Thank you very much. From Rob Entwistle again, as Intrenchuthill Fortress was never really finished, is it reasonable to suppose that the road to it was never finished either?
I would argue that the road to Intrenchuthill is one of the roads that really should be there, because that's 6,000 people waiting for dinner. Are you going to explain that, or shall I?
No, I'll let you explain.
Nothing is fiercer than a Roman army that doesn't like its commander because the commander has forgotten to bring the sandwiches. So and there is a reason why the fortress may not have been finished. We found out that they weren't very good at laying the drains. That's another paper that's nearly ready to go.
That's a new one for me, right?
Yeah, that was a new one for us as well. We were doing a confident. We walked into the fortress doing. We're going to quickly do this fortress survey because Romans are good at engineering. And then one of the students came in and went, you know that main outlet from the main drain? Yeah. Is it supposed to be 3 meters higher than the center of the valley of the fortress? And we went, no. But that's exactly what's happening.
Okay, right, that's a paper I would really be fascinated. Intrenchuthill being where it is, if you get the drainage wrong there, you're in trouble.
Yep.
Yeah. That's ever a fascinating answer. Okay, on a slightly different topic, I had a question put directly to me from Penny Jackson. How much have rivers moved since Roman times? Did they shift sideways or find a new course?
Depends which river you mean. Some of the rivers are remarkably stable. The Forth, despite meandering like mad, doesn't seem to have shifted too much. It's always been just gently meandering. The Tay jumps. And the Tay jumps a lot. The North Esk at Stracathro jumps a lot, which basically means jumping means you have flood events, and during that flood event, the river breaks through its own levee walls and basically finds a new course in the flooded area. So when the water recedes, you'll suddenly find that you're on a completely different course.
Yeah.
And in that middle bit between Dunkeld and Cargill, that is where the Tay does that an awful lot.
Yeah. We have what is probably a similar example in Yorkshire, the fort at Roll Manor, sort of east of Wakefield-ish, quite a long way east of Wakefield, in a very low-lying area next to the River Aire, or more accurately where the River Aire used to be. The River Aire now is 700 meters further to the north.
Yep.
And that's probably an example of exactly what you've just described. Moving on, because we are getting a few coming in now, from Martin Bink. Is there a possibility to get OSL dates for the roads? Is there funding for OSL? Oh, goodness, I could talk for half an hour on that, but I'll let you. It's your talk.
I am not. There may be funding. The problem is we would have to prove that it's viable on any particular site. So it may be able to get an OSL date out of Park Nuke. I'm not so, and we may be able to get it out of Innerpeffry. I am not so sure. It is the road on Shield Hill North is sitting on boulder clay, and I'm not sure we could get a decent date out of it.
Right.
But if you've got an expert on identifying the most likely places, we will be happily taking you and talking you through the option.
I'm no expert. The questioner might be, I don't know. Martin, by all means, get in touch with us. From his spelling of Martin, Martijn, he's not English, so I don't know if that will be of help to us or not. But certainly,
what explains why this is something that the Dutch have managed to do very successfully, using OSL dating to date all sorts of useful stuff.
We should probably explain to the audience what OSL actually is.
Please, you do it.
It stands for optically stimulated luminescence. Most of the science goes completely over my head, but it's due to you can actually tell the date that quartz crystals, particularly quartz crystals, were exposed to light. And how they actually do that, as I say, that the science of that is way over my head. But if you manage to extract the right material, sand or grit with quartz in it, and keep it, prevent it from being exposed to light, that's the difficult bit in extracting the sample. That can then, in theory, be dated. There are people who claim huge degrees of accuracy for OSL, some people saying to within 10 years now. I'm highly skeptical of that in an archaeological context, but there certainly are some claims for it. Moving on, because we've got quite a few to get through now. From Mark Willingdale. Back to the Caledonians again. Caledonia versus the Empire has always seemed unequal. Is there any evidence of a wider resistance? I think he's meaning sort of a confederacy between Ireland, Scotland, and Norway. Certainly was later in the Roman period, but at that point, not
Norway, Frisia, or at least Saxony, and but that's 4th century. And you have, from the 3rd century, you have something called the Picti, which seems to be a alliance of the earlier tribes. So there seems to be some merging of tribes happening in the 3rd century.
Yes.
Either that, or the Romans quietly went, oh, we don't want to do the details anymore. We have come up with a summary name for them. We can't quite tell the difference, but by the 3rd century, the Picti can give the Romans trouble. In fact, the Caledonians can give the Romans trouble. We only have the Romans' word for it that they won, and that they only had to leave. That they had to leave Scotland for completely other reasons. So there may be somewhere a completely different account what really happened. So, but that's
there's a book in that.
Yeah, but probably one for the fiction section.
From Jonathan Roberts, which in a sense is sort of related. Would any logistics support have started from the north end or intermediate points of the suggested road? After all, the Romans would have controlled sea communications.
Right.
I'll just put a question mark after that latter bit, which I think is very wise.
There's definitely multiple harbors involved. We know that there's a harbor at Bertha. We know, and later on at Carpus, so the lower end of the Tay is definitely a harbor point. we assume that somewhere around Camelon is another harbour point, if not on the Forth itself. We also suspect now that the Montrose Basin is one of the big harbours for supplying the northern forts. Those of you who are from Scotland will know the Montrose Basin as a fantastic place to see waders, but in the Roman period the water was deeper and there was a lot more of the Montrose Basin than there is now. So that would have been one of the great natural harbours of Scotland at the time. The problem is that everything, as soon as you leave, you need to make sure transport gets incredibly slow. So the chances are they were keeping the supply routes as short as possible. Mm-hmm. So bring it on by ship as far as you can, and then by road as far as you must. If that makes sense.
It certainly makes sense to me. From Alan Moore, is there any evidence of roads connecting to the so-called Glenblocker forts, e.g. Fendoch?
There's no evidence for a road actually going from the main road. No, I'm telling fibs. There seems to be some sort of road going from Ardagh over one of the camps, or there is a very controversial section through one of the camps which may have involved a road in the middle of it. Controversial because no two people reconstruct what's happening in that section the same way. Mm-hmm. But that is pretty much, that would be a road that goes to Dalganross. Otherwise, there isn't a metalled road, but as Alan Moore from Crieff will know, there's only so many ways you can get to Fendoch, either from Perth or from Crieff, and because the mountains are in the way. So that's the option there.
Okay. From Delwyn Matthews, I understand that the Gask Ridge may be seen as Rome's earliest fortified land frontier. Where did the name come from? Also, Mike Bishop, in his book Roman Roads of Britain, no, it's a secret history of the Roman Roads of Britain, to give him the right title, talks about Edward I using some of these roads. Any comments on this, please? Could some of the Roman roads have been altered or adapted during this period? I should have split that in two and put it to you twice. So we'll talk about the Gask Ridge first.
Gask Ridge is easy. That central bit where the towers are and where we have the metalled road, that long whale hill that the road runs on is known as the Gask Ridge.
Okay. So the second one referring to Mike Bishop's book, and he does talk about Edward I and others using various roads for their own purposes, but could some of those have been altered and adapted during this period?
The short, yes. Not necessarily altered, but used.
Yes.
Let me just... Sorry, just going to show you something. That is Stracathro. And that's the Roman fort of Stracathro, and the 18th century structures post-dating the Roman period in this area here, which may be an earlier church. If that is the case, that is where Edward I received the surrender from Balliol, from John Balliol.
Right.
And the only way he would have got there is if he had followed the Roman ideas of how you get to the site. Because we haven't got the road, but we have a route way which again nicely marked with prehistoric monuments as well as medieval monuments, that basically allowed Edward to basically go from fort to fort and from camp to fort, and using some of the Roman camps, and definitely using the churches that had established itself close by or inside Roman military sites. So they were using the infrastructure to establish the Christian infrastructure in the early medieval period, and then in the late medieval period, when Edward I was coming, he was using the church infrastructure to do his own campaigning. It's a question of where do you lay the stresses? There is something that's called geographical determinism, which some people hate with a vengeance. And some people go, why did that actually need a particular name? You don't cross a swamp. You go around a swamp unless you know the track through it. And therefore, if you have a war, the war will flow around that swamp and not through the swamp. And same goes with if there is a mountain, you go usually around the mountain, not over the mountain, if you're coming with an army.
Yeah.
If you bring a Roman army, if you're bringing a medieval army, if you're bringing a Pictish army, it doesn't matter. Until somebody comes up with the concept of a helicopter or aircraft, the rules are the same for everybody. So until in the 19th century, they actually start to drain the landscape and completely change how the landscape works, you are tied to the very limited options that present themselves in that area, in Strathmore.
Okay. I can't add very much to that. Without spending another hour in discussion on the various routes that happen to go up the Vale of York and Vale of Mowbray, where I am. But a certain amount of geographical determinism applies, but actually not a lot. But that's for another talk. This next one from, hang on. Oh, it's not a question. It was just an observation from one of our helpers. Wow. I think that's a compliment.
Thank you.
From Adrian Ward. I think this is probably in reference to trying to work out where roads may or may not be to the Glenblocker forts. I wonder if LiDAR would help.
LiDAR, we hope that LiDAR will help. We're actually at the moment literally sitting with the LiDAR data for the area around Stracathro to see if we can track something down that we think has to exist, which is a link between Montrose and Stracathro. So we're using it. There's a lot of work to be done now that the Scottish LiDAR is available, and one of the things I'm looking forward to in June is sitting down with the LiDAR, in July, is sitting down with the LiDAR stuff and having another attempt at tracking the road between Glasingall and Doon, or Glasingall and Stirling.
Well, if you have any success, please let us know. And
Will
an
do.
entry for again, I'm plugging Itinerary again for our journal, and in the Roman roads in 2021 section, or 2022 it would be there, in the following years. Please let us know. We're trying to ensure that we have, it's a bit like Britannia's Roman Britain in. Really, it's a review of all the field work and all the study that's been done in the previous year, or everything that we're aware of. Plug over, and I think, unless I missed something, that is the last of the questions. I'll just make an absolute check, but I can't see another one. Plenty of compliments, though.
Thank you.
No, I think that's absolutely it for now. No, excellent, thank you. No more questions coming in. I'll give it another minute or so just to make sure that we've covered everybody. If anyone does have a thought, by all means, send it. Excellent. Thanks, Birgitta. Phenomenal.
Thank
It
you.
was an excellent talk, and thank you very, very much. And we're all looking forward to the results of the work that you're still doing, particularly what you might find on your work next year.
Well, if any of the audience is from Perthshire or Angus or can easily get there on a day, we're still looking for a couple of people who are fleet of foot who might want to help out in second and possible third week in July around Stracathro. So if you're interested, get in touch.
Is that for geophysical survey?
No, this is for topographical survey and basically ground truthing several theories. But one of the things we found out is there is a mining area just behind Stracathro that would have been of lots and lots of interest to the Romans. But the mining area is a little bit big, so we need people who are fleet of foot and don't mind climbing the odd hill or two.
Okay.
To actually check if any of the material if on the top of it there is medieval material or even material that may predate the medieval period.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. And if I had time, I'd be up there myself. Sadly not. But I'm sure there may well be someone in the audience who is. So by all means, pop up and help them out.
That would be wonderful.
Just more thanks. Still no questions, I'm afraid. Thanks for the excellent talk. That's from Tim. So I think I'm just about wind it up. Thank you, Birgitta, for an excellent talk and an equally excellent Q&A session. The Q&As are becoming one of the main features of this series now, because we allow a lot of flexibility and a lot of discussion, which some don't, but it seems to be paying off. It only remains more for me to thank the team in the background. You see me, you see the speaker, but you don't see everybody else. So
someone's asking about what type of mining.
Oops, sorry.
Sorry.
Somebody piped in then.
There is a question by somebody going, what type of mining?
I missed that.
It's typical boundary fault mining. So this is silver, copper and gold deposit with a lot of iron thrown in for keeping people busy. So basically it would have been, as far as the Romans are concerned, it would have been everything the Roman army needed, including the pay.
Yes, indeed. But distinguishing Roman mining from others, if it's been heavily mined later, might not be so easy, I imagine. It's certainly not been easy in the Dales.
No, it's been proving difficult, but yeah. It's interesting.
Yes, certainly. Okay, so where was I? Thanking the background team, which I think this evening, I hope I don't miss anybody, was Jeff, Elizabeth, Dave, Rob, Jim, and I think Tim might have been there as well. And if I have missed anyone, I don't think so. I do apologize. I'll wrap it up then. It remains for me only to thank everybody who attended. And again to Birgitta for a fantastic talk. Thank you very much. And
thank you for having me. Good night.
You're welcome.